Hey, this is John from Gadeon. Today I'm going to be going over a ranking for all of the finance books that I've read over the last 10 or so years. A lot of these are from this year, though, or at least like the last couple of years. So I should say that. Now, you'll also notice that there are a lot. I didn't think there would be this many, to be honest, but I do get very into topics, I suppose. So, yeah, but we're just going to go through the finance books. I did include some economics in here as well because I do think it's indispensable, especially for topics like asset allocation. Additionally, one of these is just like a manual on Excel, which arguably maybe fits better into like a general business topic, but it's so useful for finance that it's worth including in here. Now, just going through the layout a little bit, one thing you'll notice is that I don't actually have a tier list. I made this in Excel, which the reason for that is because I'm not going to pay for to remove the advertisements on the tier list website. So this is pretty straightforward actually to make yourself. Basically, aside from coloring, you just got to insert text boxes. Then when you insert pictures, make sure that you place them over the cells, otherwise they'll go into each cell and then they'll be incomprehensibly small. So, and then a couple other things to mention too. A couple of these are shorter ones, like the crypto valuation book. Is only about 30 pages, and the other shorter one is the economics of private equity here, but this one's I think about 70 pages. So I think this one more reasonably counts as like a book. This one though I have included because it's on a very particular topic that's hard to find information on. Now these are all stuff that I've read, or at least read a large chunk of. So some of these I've only maybe read like 100 pages of, but most of them I've read full, but I'll maybe talk about that as we go through them. These ones I haven't read or haven't read yet. A couple of these like security analysis is just of interest, I think, to most people to see where I would put this. So I did go through the comp section on securities analysis just to kind of have a good idea of where it would probably rank now. And then some of these other ones I've flipped through, but I'm still waiting to kind of read them in full. But I do think that these do round out the list better because a lot of this is kind of lacking portfolio management aside from the CFA curriculum. Okay, so let's start by benchmarking this. It is kind of a funny list, because like some of these I read a long time ago, like money, and then some of them are significantly more technical. So it's kind of funny to look at this list, I guess. But okay, let's kind of benchmark this. So I think clear S tier are the CFA books. Now you can see, I've been through, I just recently passed the CFA level 3. You can see the volume of content, of course, and I do think, because maybe an interesting question we could ask is, okay, like obviously put it together, and I think it's probably the best course on investments available, but even individually, each of the books are very, very strong. And maybe that's what I like about the curriculum so much. But you do cover a lot of topics, and all of them rather well. The books are all extremely practical, as well as I would say you get enough into the theory that it's not complete abstraction, but that's probably a little bit difficult to develop in business anyways. There are some books that I've that are like on abstract topics in business, and some of them are completely useless, to be honest. But for things like economic theory, for example, those are kind of the theoretical considerations you make here. So, learning about things like marginal utility of wealth. But those are very useful for understanding how consumers make decisions, for example, in different economic regimes, and therefore how they affect your investment opportunities. So it's all still very practical, and I think it's just especially when I read a lot of these other books, and I circle back to these are, I think, very much the best balance of just detail and practicum. So yeah, okay. Now, obvious deeds here is Rich Dad Poor Dad. So this one I actually read much more recently. And the reason for that was because we used to have a review up on the book, because I was curious if anyone who's been recommending this book has actually read it. And the answer I came to was no. I don't think anyone's actually read this book. They all just recommend it. And there's a lot of problems with the book. In summary, though, Robert Kiyosaki fails to deliver a compelling argument and also is insulting to people. And so and I don't just mean his dad, I mean really to the entire educated and perhaps less than wealthy class, even though he relies on all of these well-educated people like accountants, for example. And he references that you should get a good accountant. But, let's talk a little bit. I think the most clear example of him just being wrong is in the introduction, when he references 3 occupations that, because his entire thesis of the book is basically to say, okay, people don't learn money in school, that is why they don't become wealthy. But then he references 3 occupations, lawyers, doctors, and accountants, as occupations that everyone knows somebody who is a doctor, lawyer, or accountant who has issues with money. And first, nobody does. And second, if they did, then accountants learn money. So that is a self-defeating example, and your argument just boils down to nothing. So anyways, bad book. I don't like that it's insulting either. He's got an excerpt in here where, for example, a mom is walking with her kid, and she's talking about how she wants to send him to a good college, and he chuckles to himself because he finds it so funny that this poor idiot would want to send their kid to school. And so that's anyways, that guy sucks. So okay, next thing, let's start with all the financial modeling books. So you can see that there's a number of them here. We'll leave valuations for later. We'll consider valuations maybe separate. So these are purely on, I'll throw the Python for finance one up here. No, actually I'll do it with the other Python book. Okay, then we also got Simon Benninga's book. This is risk modeling. Anyways, see a lot of books on financial modeling. Very interesting. Mostly superfluous. What I would recommend you do instead, to be honest, is instead of learning financial modeling, I'd recommend you learn general Excel and financial principles, perhaps. More than knowing how to put things into Excel, I think it's better to study the financial statements and their connections and the math. Because these books all kind of suffer, not all of them. Some of the better ones suffer from them less, but a lot of the other ones suffer from trying to cover too much and connecting too many topics in a non-detailed fashion. So then it kind of just covers every topic poorly. So that's why I suggest that if you really want to get very good at financial modeling, then you study each topic separately, rather than I think trying to read books on them. But in any case, now I'm very good in Excel. So okay, let's rank these. So Business Risk and a Simulation Model is an okay book. The main problem with it, though, is that if you already know statistics, I don't feel that it offers anything new from a basic financial modeling. And maybe that's just me because, for example, all of the CFA curriculum goes over things like conditional value at risk, which is, if I'm not mistaken, the most complicated topic in this book, which doesn't take you very far. So, if I had to, I'd probably recommend more than risk and simulation modeling. Probably a book like John Hall's book on risk management in financial institutions, though I haven't read it. You can see it's not here, but I do think it goes a lot more in depth on risk management. Yeah, okay. Simon Benninga's financial modeling is, I think, clearly the most comprehensive one, and has probably the best description of principles available, so that can just go to A. I'm not going to put it in an S because I don't think that, as I mentioned, like financial modeling books probably don't actually deserve to be up here, unfortunately. Maybe I'll find a new one in the future, but I don't know if I'm going to be reading anymore. Probably not. Okay, principles of financial modeling can go in B. I think it covers more overall ground than business risk and simulation modeling. And it does a significantly better job of conveying certain topics than some of these other books, which some of these are practically slop, but not exactly. They just not very useful, I would say. So I'm going to put these two in D tier. I'm going to put Michael Reese's other book in C tier, though I don't think it's as good as business risk and simulation modeling. And then I'm going to put the Microsoft data analysis and business modeling in B. This is much more of a reference book, but you can certainly go through it, and I've been through it. And so there are some topics unrelated to finance, but there are obviously chapters on financial functions. But some of the other things that you go through are things like, how do you run a multiple linear regression in Excel? How to use dummy variables in your regression models? How do you optimize for inventory using nonlinear optimization with the Excel solver, for example, which obviously does that automatically, so you don't have to know any of the math. Yeah. Okay, next set of books. We'll go through now the behavioral economics stuff. So let's pull that up. Like behavioral economics, behavioral finance, / neuroeconomics, on those topics. And you can see that there's surprisingly perhaps more than one book, which is perhaps interesting for many of you because I'm sure you've never heard of the topic, but I was very interested in using this for behavioral modeling for a little bit. So I was a little bit disappointed to know that some of these books don't really do a very good job of that. And the main issue with the field seems to be that nobody's very good at incorporating the neuroscience into economic models at the moment, or at least not through this literature. So there's a lot more focus on psychology and neuroscience than on economics, I would say. And I think that's a little disappointing. Additionally, I think that the way that they really get away from the math is not doing the books a service, because the math can say a lot more quickly than a bunch of words. So yeah. Okay, enough said about that. Let's talk about these. So first one is Behavioral Finance, the Second Generation. I do really like this book. I do think it does a very good job at conveying things like investor biases that then show up into the process. So for example, a lot of investors exhibit loss aversion bias, which may get them to hold on to losing investments for longer than there is optimal, as one example. So this does a pretty solid job. I do like the book. The only drawback of it is that it doesn't really even, I would say, try to do the mathematical modeling. So let's put that in A. I'm also going to add, this is a shorter book. It's harder to read. I think of these books, this is the only one that makes a serious attempt at the modeling. So I do also want to put this one in A. This is Bounded Rationality and Behavioral Economics. Yeah. So one of the things that this book does, for example, is that it establishes like what is bounded rationality first, let's say. Basically, it's this idea that people have a limited set of cognitive resources that they can devote to decision making, and that as their cognitive resources wane, they make less rational decisions. So how do we incorporate that into economics? Well, the model that they suppose is that, we create variables basically for representing cognitive resources and optimal decision making. And basically they, and then you suppose, okay, based on, how optimal your your cognitive resources required is proportional to the is proportional to the optimal decision making. So in other words, the more effort you put in, the more optimal your decisions are. So that was a bit of a mess. So basically what that looks like is literally boundaries on an integral for, decision making, where your boundaries are your cognitive resources. So I think interesting book, also relatively short, like 140 pages, I think, 150, something like that. So it's faster to get through. Okay. Some of these other ones, like behavioral economics and finance, and neuroeconomics, judgment and decision making. I mean, these aren't like terrible books. I don't think they're very good though. I wouldn't recommend reading them because, again, they just don't make any attempt, I feel, to really model these things. Neuroeconomics of the Firm kind of does. It does have some reference to adding, for example, like dopamine to utility models and describing things, I think, more directly in terms of like using those to describe investor motivations. So I think this book does a significantly better job than the other two. But these aren't terrible books. Okay, let's see, what next? Let's pull up the like mass media ones. More like the ones for the common folk. Okay, so let's talk about these. So first, Tony Robbins' Money Master the Game. I actually think this is a pretty good book. I think it's probably likely that his financial advisor read it, because it's not bad. And a lot of the advice is very like typical, but it's practical. He says, passive investing, Roth IRAs, etc. So it's not a bad book, actually. It's a lot better than Robert Kiyosaki's book. So let's put that in C. The Intelligent Investor, I think we're going to put in, I'm going to put it in B tier. Hopefully, I mean, I guess it doesn't really matter. The main issue is that if you read this book, although I think you'd have perhaps practical investment philosophy, I don't think you'd be a very good investment practitioner with this book alone. So I think with that said, and maybe that's not really what the book is trying to do, it's just trying to supply greater awareness around issues. But I do think that now especially there are better books for that. Okay, Buy Then Build. I'm actually going to put this in B. Although I think it does have some problems, I do think it supplies some insight into issues that are hard to get from other sources. So, for example, when you're buying a business, how long does the process take? How do you source deals better locally and such? So I do think it's actually pretty useful in that respect. Okay, Small Business Financial Management Kit for Dummies. Probably top of C is where we'll put it, actually. But I'm just going to I'll reorganize this later. But not a bad book. I read this because I had to go down to the U.S. potentially to do something. So I just read up on this in case I was missing anything. It does have some interesting topics. This is clearly written from an accounting perspective, though, which is also interesting because you do see the difference in risk aversion amongst accountants compared to financial analysts, for example, come out quite a bit in this book. There are some practical aspects of it, of course, with it being a for dummies book. For example, it goes over things like financial auditing procedures at a business to make sure that none of your employees are stealing from you, as an example. So this is actually very practical. I do think, for people in business, this is really useful. Yeah, okay. Cool. So let's do the valuation books next. So let's pull all the valuation books up. You can see that some of these are pretty specific as well. Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I think that's all we're going to put in here. Okay. So first, practical guide to startup valuations. And by the way, I do think that reading about valuations is actually pretty useful compared to financial modeling, for example. This is probably where you should spend your time instead. And all of these books are pretty good. But let's kind of go through them because some of them are better than others. So first, practical guide for startup valuations, I think is A. I think in terms of niche valuations, this one really stands out and also with a lot of like broad utility, right? Because I mean, startups is a lot more than just small businesses. It also includes things like venture capital methods and tools for understanding how angel investors, for example, come to their decisions. Yeah, okay. And a lot of that is a qualitative thing as well. So it's very perhaps useful to have a manual like this around. Okay, Valuation Life Sciences, good book. I think it doesn't do enough to break away from other valuation books, so I'm gonna put this as C. And I mean, there are some like things that are very specific to life sciences in here. So for example, maybe if you didn't do any other types of valuations, this would be a decent read. I don't believe that it does a good enough job of explaining the general valuation principles, though, to I think to really be useful as a standalone. But in terms of things like, for example, adding probabilistic models to your financial projections for for like a biotech company, for example, this is certainly a go-to book. It also has information that's very useful on things like the success of clinical trials at every stage, which can be difficult information to find, apparently. So now I read this for a very specific purpose because I was doing an equity research report on a biotech company operating on neurodegenerative disorders. So I was interested in, learning a little bit more about that process. Okay, now investment valuation. I think this is an easy S tier. I've read the book twice. I think it's pretty good. So, I mean, why is it good, right? Well, I think a couple things. One is that it has a very much a broad view of investment topics overall. I think that Aswath Damodaran does a very good job of explaining like certain, let's say like tips and tricks and why certain things make sense on financial statements and why some things don't intuitively. Obviously, he's also sort of the king of valuations, if you will. Yeah. And certainly I think that if you do read this book, then you will know how to value companies when you're done. It is kind of a long one at like 1,400 pages. Not nearly as long as the CFA curriculum, don't get me wrong, but still pretty long. But I think this is probably enough of a standalone to do valuations from alone. So very great book. Yeah. Okay. Valuation can go into I I don't know. I don't know how I want to put it. Well, let's talk about it a little bit first. I think it does a pretty good job of conveying valuations. Though, but not as technical on a lot of the modeling, come to think of it. The problem with that, by the way, is that modeling is a very specific exercise. So it should be precise, I think. But this book, it does still have a lot of value to certain people. So, for example, I don't think that it's a good book for analysts, but I do think it's a very strong book for company management to understand what things actually drive value for the company and focusing on long-term value creation. So, for example, one of the things that's not well understood in finance, so it is well understood, by the way, is the idea that companies get pressure from the shareholders to act in the short-term interests of the earnings per share every quarter. Even though, as this book, for example, argues, even though it's from McKinsey, right, which you might associate with, I don't know, something nefarious, perhaps. But the book, though, does suggest pretty strongly that the evidence for EPS being associated with value, as described by return on invested capital, is very low. So, still a great book. Yeah. But largely from a management perspective. So I think it does work very well for executives of companies. Also a very long book. It's pretty similar to investment valuation in terms of length. So this is pretty long. Okay, let's probably going to grab the I don't know, let's grab the economics books now, like the other economics ones. Okay, those are all the economics ones. So let's go through these. And these ones are all, actually, this one's not so technical, so let's start with this. The Economics of Private Equity. This is a pretty short one. It's from the CFAI. I think it's okay. It's just kind of a collection of research, though, so I was hoping to get other things out of it, like, for example, some more to do with, like, I felt like the economics of private equity and how those are incorporated into, like, valuation methods and such. So I mean, it's okay. It's just not very useful. So yeah. Okay, the economics of money, banking, and financial markets. Yep. Okay. Detailed book doesn't go into enough depth on some topics, though. At least that's how I feel about it. And I think too many examples for me personally, because I do not feel like it's very necessary to have a lot of examples, given how I think practical a lot of economics is. I think that it's just easy to come up with examples naturally of where these things would apply. Things representing concepts. So I'm gonna put this at B, though. It's still very detailed and it still has a lot about financial markets. It's very useful. Okay. Advanced microeconomic theory, we'll start off with that. In terms of microeconomic books, this is fantastic. This is probably the best book on microeconomics. Having flipped through some, not all books, but the math is very pretty in here. I really like it. You do need to understand some set theory to get around this, and for example, in even just chapter 1, which is just a discussion of utility models, there are a lot of heavy use of equivalence relationships, partial orderings, and convexity. So now there is an appendix, though, on set notations, so you can use that to navigate that, and it's definitely an enjoyable book, just not very practical. but it is very, very good for microeconomics. So I'm going to say B. Now, in case you're wondering, like, what does microeconomics actually go over? It, in terms of financial theory, it is kind of useful for understanding business strategy, right? Because there are things like game theory perspectives that can be used. But really, it's more about understanding consumer behaviors. That's what an investment analyst would be more interested in here. And, the point isn't really to model relationships, if that makes sense. It's to, and then, spit out a very specific number, I would say. That's not really the point. The point is understanding generally what these what these models would say about how are consumers going to kind of act in certain scenarios. But it's very obvious that, none of these models can be complete at the moment, for example, and even things like, bounded rationality, for example, add additional layers to understanding economic theory at the consumer level. Okay, so next one, Advanced Macroeconomics by David Romer, is also another S tier book. You might not agree that this is so practical, but economics, like macroeconomics in particular, is arguably one of the most, I would say, not just interesting and powerful subjects, but also one of the most important for understanding investment analysis. There are a lot of reasons why you'd want to know economics, but think in summary. If I am looking to invest in a business in a certain country, if I don't know at macroeconomics, for example, how am I possibly going to understand if there is a shifting economic regime that's going to completely wipe out that investment over the next 10 years, for example? Because a lot of equilibrium relationships in economics do hold up over a long period of time, but a long period of time can look like decades sometimes. So you're looking to make long-term decisions with economics, and really the backbone of the theory of asset allocation is also economics, and asset allocation has been more or less in modern portfolio implementation. Asset allocation has been the most impactful thing to focus on. And that's where most of the value of portfolio management comes from. At least that's what it seems. Okay, so very great book, though. Goes into a lot of detail. I don't think there's a better place to go through understanding equilibrium relationships than this. I think it really makes that a point. Okay. And maybe just a couple things to talk about, because you're probably interested in maybe reading some of these books now that I kind of put them in S tier, right? Investment valuation just requires maybe like basic statistics. You should understand at least conceptually what regression model is, and understand summation notation, obviously, because DCF models are mostly represented with series, like finite time series. So, and then advanced macroeconomics, you do need some calculus. Preferably, you'd even have maybe like a semester of analysis to go through this, but not necessarily. Calculus, maybe 1 and 2 is probably fine. I don't think you necessarily need vector calculus, but let's pull up this book. Okay, because this will give you the prerequisites. So this is calculus for business, finance, and economics. Just very summary, very, I'd say pretty comprehensive for economics. I think it's actually a pretty good book. Honestly, not much about finance in here, so maybe I should have actually grouped this with the other economics books. Even though they say, economics and finance, it's really kind of focused on economics. But this takes you from like basic derivatives to I think the last chapter is on Hamiltonians. So using Hamiltonians to find eigenvalues and eigenvectors of systems of linear equations is kind of where this book ends off on. I don't think it's terribly great for learning calculus, but for learning maybe the prerequisites for something like David Romer's book, this is probably going to get you there. Additionally, it's I think it's a pretty easy math book. So yeah. Okay. Cool. So let's do like kind of the corporate finance one now. Finance ones now. Get those out of the way. Okay, I think that's all of them. Okay, so you have applied corporate finance. You gotta put this in C. It's it's kind of interesting because this is also from Aswath Damodaran. The problem with this is just that it's kind of like a worse version of investment valuation, to be honest. So I just don't think you should bother with it. Okay, corporate and investment banking. This book is very detailed but very dry. It reads a lot like a law textbook. So that's kind of it's kind of hard to get through, but it's very good, and the commentary is very insightful in some areas. So, for example, Kiyosaki talks about or I guess he writes about the differences between American and European investment banks, for example, and discusses the differences in the regulatory environments imposed upon the two and how that has led to a proliferation of American investment banks in Europe, for example. There's also a very interesting commentary on the 2008 financial crisis as well, and how the investment banks had reacted during that time. So I think very interesting for sure, very detailed, also very practical for the subject. You will see a lot of document prep in this book. It's just very boring, but yeah, it's an A tier. Yeah. Okay. Anyways, okay. Financial statement analysis from Wiley. This is I think easy B tier. It does a good job of emphasizing, for example, that the people that prepare your financial statements are not exactly your friend and are possibly trying to be dishonest and misrepresent the actual situation, right? Because they are trying to, in principle, they are motivated typically, whoever's preparing this, because they have options. And by options, I mean stock options. They're typically motivated to, pump the stock price. So that can look like misleading financial statements. And so a very important reason why you should really study a lot of financial statement analysis, and even though this is covered in the CFA curriculum as well, probably better than this for sure, but is to be able to go through financial statements with relative confidence that you're not getting swindled. Whenever you are buying businesses or, looking at, like, especially small businesses are very bad for this. But the financial statements can be very misleading or even just a mess, right? So how do you sort those things out and tell things like, okay, is this person who has, sent me these statements overspending in certain areas, for example? Are they inflating revenues, which could be of interest if you're buying a business, for example, and so on. So, and then knowing how to figure all that stuff out is very important. Okay, so let's just move this up to a neat line now. Okay, so let's go over, I think these are maybe all just miscellaneous now. There's a couple of Python books. Let's go through those. And then I think just the rest are kind of miscellaneous. Okay, so this one is, what's it called again? Data Analytics for Finance using Python. It's a collection of research. It's just not very useful. But, if you want to go through your research, then you can read that. Python for Finance cookbook. I have kind of the same impression of cookbooks that I have of financial modeling books, and that I don't think they teach Python, finance, or in this case, statistics very well at all. So unfortunately, I'm going to be putting this in C. I was hoping that it would be better. Additionally, maybe another problem with these books is because one of the issues I have with cookbooks is that so many of them are just extremely superficial in that they don't really teach you how to build these things. They kind of just show use this person's module, and then if you go and use this code later, it's not going to work because the modules undergo changes. Additionally, I don't think that really helps to understand the structure of things either. So instead of reading cookbooks, I really recommend you don't do that, and instead just read something like data structures and algorithms in Python, for example. I think that's going to get you a lot farther, I think, than reading a cookbook. And maybe after reading something like data structures and algorithms in Python, which is a literal book, by the way, then going and maybe reading a cookbook is okay if you're looking for specific things. But I don't think that any of this stuff is going to stick. And because so maybe a decent reference material, but again, a lot of the code doesn't work anymore, so that's another problem. Okay, let's just go through the miscellaneous ones now. We'll pull these two up. Let's do the ones that are kind of like these are kind of like research-based ones. So let's put it like that. Okay. So valuation of crypto assets. I think unfortunately is a D tier. I thought I liked it at first, but then I found out, for example, the use of Metcalfe's law, for example, in this book erroneously doesn't apply logs to the variables, which I only found out a few days after I read it, as I was going to actually apply some of these models. So that was disappointing. In other books, that's not such a terrible deal, but because this one is 30 pages, it's research oriented, and that's one of the main models. Not a fan of that. Aside from that, and it's kind of sad to put it down here because it does have some very interesting things to say, for example, about how do we value assets that have no fundamental backing, aka crypto assets. Okay. Next one, value creation and leverage buyouts. I'm actually going to put this in a C tier. Now, this is a very technical book. It's basically just a collection of research from the early 2000s, I think. So there is that. It's a collection of research, and it's a little bit old. But some of the results are very insightful. So it has, for example, results on what does management have a significant effect on the return on investment of a leveraged buyout, and then, for example, dividing that by education. And so what do we see? Well, most education does correlate, for example, with LBO success, which makes sense. More educated people can make better decisions about these things, they know more. But are there any educations that don't perform well? And it turns out there's actually two. It's business degrees and engineering degrees actually have a negative correlation with the success of LBOs. And I've always found that kind of funny. But anyways, so very interesting. Okay, now we have David DeRosa's book, Bursting the Bubble. This is a very interesting book. Unfortunately, it's not super duper practical, but it delivers a lot of insight. I'm going to put this in A, by the way, into bubbles and what causes them. Do they even exist? And that's David DeRosa's maybe large argument here, is that either bubbles don't exist or efficient markets are not, they can't possibly be efficient. And he goes through a lot of the models. I think every model that's available, basically, to say that none of these models could accurately predict any of the bubbles in, like, leading into the bubbles, not in hindsight. At least when, certain adjustments have been made to account for things like the fact maybe that some of these models rely on things that had been leading into those bubble poppings, if you will. Yeah, but it's a great book, very insightful. It's a great book. Very insightful on, I think, just a topic that's very mainstream. So it's great to read something that still provides something new on that topic. I think it's a very cool book. Okay, now last three, kind of miscellaneous. These two are kind of on the lines of portfolio management, but they're definitely not going to give you enough, I think, to manage a portfolio on your own. Let's start with the business of venture capital. I think it's a B tier. The only drawback is that it's not like super useful. I do like a practical guide for startup valuations better for understanding like even due diligence processes, to be honest, in a venture capital firm. But this is pretty good, and it does give some insight from the perspective of people that are either looking to gather venture capital or who are looking to start a venture capital fund themselves. It is kind of funny in some sections, for example, when the author is talking about, and who is this authored by? I should say the name, Nathaniel something. Sorry, I don't know how to say the last name. I also can't really read that. Anyways. But, he writes, for example, that there's a lot of groveling necessary to obtain funds. So it is a fun read, at least, so that's good news. Okay, goals-based portfolio theory. I very much like this book, actually. It's interesting because Franklin Parker proposes basically a mathematical framework to a lot of things that are kind of related to behavioral finance, for example. And so to kind of describe the issue, basically goals-based investing is the idea that when your portfolio manager is coming up with ways to invest your money, they should try to consider things like, do you want to buy a certain set of things, for example, at some point in time? So they'll work with you to delineate what, how much, the time horizon, and maybe in as Franklin Parker here describes, the probability that let's say like the percent, how much are you willing to sacrifice that goal in the future, right? Say to obtain other goals. So what Franklin Parker does here basically is propose the sort of start of the matrix algebra required to formalize goals-based portfolio theory and take it from, say, like, DCF modeling to something that can be more automated, because that's what math is effectively used for. In case you don't know, maybe one very quick use of math and why you should be interested in this is that math is basically just like the fundamental programming language. So anyways, although the mathematics here are not complete, as Franklin suggests many times, that's more an issue of the field itself being underdeveloped than Franklin Parker's attempt. So I think this is a very ambitious book. I think it's very interesting. I do think it's got a lot of good understanding of the process to offer. So I do want to put this in S. Okay. B. Or robo-advisor. Build a robo-advisor in Python is going to be. It's a little disappointing that it ended up here because some aspects of the book I think are extremely good. For example, the discussion of the development of modern portfolio theory, and then showing the proofs for basically, for example, two risky asset portfolio optimization using Lagrange multipliers is, I think, more insightful. Maybe it's just because I haven't seen that yet until I read this book. I don't even think of the CFA curriculum because the CFA doesn't really go over like optimization theory. So yeah. The rest of the book though is, I mean, it's good. I do think that you'll learn a lot about portfolio management if you don't know anything about it. I do think that some of the things in the book are too focused on particulars of, like, for example, the kinds of accounts that can be invested in, as opposed to like a broader view of how do we code from a theoretical perspective portfolio actions like rebalancing, say it like that. But you do build kind of a complete robo advisor. You know, you'll go through the parts, and then you can always integrate it later. But yeah, okay. So be tier for that. Now, these other books. So again, just to kind of clarify, I haven't read these yet. Some of these I'm planning on reading. Basically everything except security analysis I am planning on reading at some point in the future. These do provide more rounding though for the tier list as well. So I'm getting my thoughts where I think these are going to land. And then I did go through security analysis comparables analysis section. So I kind of have an idea maybe where the rest of the quality of the book would land. So I would probably say securities analysis would probably end up in B. It's pretty similar to the intelligent investor in terms of quality and application. So probably end up about here. Okay, now we have Lifetime Financial Advice. I think this would also probably end up as a B tier book. I think a lot of focus on research that's fine, but a lot of the principles governing financial markets really have been stable for the last while. I do think we might see that change in the next while. So maybe a lot of that theory will not be, I wouldn't say not useful, because if you understand the theory, maybe you'll see it coming better, but that the application of it may change significantly. So in any case, the book does appear to offer still like portfolio management frameworks, for example, with, because basically the idea is like, how do we modify, similar to goals-based investing, how do we modify a portfolio to incorporate the major changes in somebody's life, including, like as expected, like, oh, they are maybe going to have kids at this time. Maybe they're going to be mid-career around here, and they're going to make the most money in their career somewhere here. And they're going to retire around here. And how long are they going to be retired for? Yeah. Okay. Anywho. All right. Introduction to Mathematical Finance with Applications is probably going to end up being an A tier book. Pretty detailed. Fortunately, not everything in here is about bonds and derivatives, because I'm mostly interested in reading this for the portfolio management aspects, rather than trying to do derivatives math, because to work up to something like that, you do need stochastic calculus behind you. And I could get through it. It would just take a long time to get up there. So yeah, and also I don't think I'm going to be getting a job as a quant anytime soon. Okay, so next one, Modern Portfolio Theory and Investment Analysis, is probably going to end up being an S tier book. So I've looked at this quite a bit. I'm very excited to consider it read over the next while, but really like that it gives a more in-depth view of the math of portfolio management than the CFA curriculum, of the math at least, and in-depth as in really kind of working on deriving a lot of the relationships. So I think that's something I'm really going to appreciate about this book as I work through it. But it does generally touch on all topics of portfolio management, so maybe that's another thing to mention as well. Okay, private capital investing is probably going to end up being a B tier as well. It's a lot about how do we basically about private equity deals and those types of deals. So yeah, and things like alternative debt. Okay, blah blah blah. All right, let's quickly order all this stuff so that you can see where it would all maybe fit into an absolute ranking. And I'll also maybe give some commentary right now on what books lay investors should focus on and what books that they should stay away from. Certainly everything down here just kind of stay away from, to be honest. Yeah, because there's better books to read. Okay, let's see here. I want to, investment valuation is more practical, but I just like these books a lot more. David Romer's book is so much fun. So yeah, you probably won't agree with that, but yeah, I think it's a lot of fun. Okay, and super insightful. Some of the commentary in here on, for example, like how is global warming, for example, expected to affect the economy in terms of percent magnitude, and then going through a literature review on that and showing, for example, that even the most astute supporters of the environment as economists, economists that have believed very strongly that they would find a significant effect on the economy from environmental effects, even they were sort of hard pressed to find maybe more than a 2% change or 2% expected change in the total GDP, which is a big deal over 100 years, right? So at the turn of the century, which is still a lot, but probably not as much as we would think. So anyway, some of the commentary in here is very insightful, but the math is obviously very in-depth, which is maybe the main attraction to it. Okay, so now in terms of A tier books, probably gonna put Bounded Rationality at the end. I'm gonna move Simon Benninga's book back. Corporate investment banking is probably at the top of A tier, to be honest. Not very practical if you're looking to be a lay investor, but for lay finance and maybe for business purposes, it's half useful, but very, very detailed and insightful. Okay, Practical Guide to Startup Valuations is probably definitely the next one. This one's still very useful, I think, for private investing. I'm gonna put Behavioral Finance, then Financial Modeling from Simon Benninga, and then Bursting the Bubble, and then Bounded Rationality. Okay, yeah, in that order, we'll settle on that. Now, B. Okay, Valuation is gonna move to the top of B. Neuroeconomics is probably gonna move to the end. Maybe Buy Then Build should be at the end, actually, because the book is still kind of sensational in some respects. So yeah, maybe we'll say that at that. Let's see. So Valuation is going to go at the top. And I do think there's a lot of principles to be had from that book. We're going to move Financial Statement Analysis up next. I think that's still a pretty good book. Let's move Financial Modeling back. We'll move The Intelligent Investor up. We'll keep that here. I like Advanced Microeconomics better than this one. The Calculus for Business, Finance, and Economics is probably, it's not as useful. Okay, let's move that back. And don't get me wrong, like it's not like useful in a practical sense. Like, if you want to read more advanced textbooks, you probably should just learn like calculus itself rather than like learning calculus for business, because I don't think it does cover, like, for example, it doesn't cover like triple integrals, for example, and arguably a lot of things like for example, I don't think it uses Hermitian matrices even. So, and I could be wrong about that. I know it uses Jacobians, so might use Hermitians. Anyways, blah blah blah. Okay. Let's move. Okay, I like it more than the book on data analysis. I like it less than microeconomics. So, okay, let's move it to there. We're gonna move this here. Move this here. I'll move principles of financial modeling up. Then we'll put calculus for business, finance, and economics, then the business of venture capital, then neuroeconomics in the firm, then buy them build. Okay, cool. All right, very cool. Let's move valuation of life sciences to the top. Then we'll have business risk and simulation modeling. We'll move this down here for now. Probably applied corporate finance then. They're gonna put okay, no. Actually, I'm gonna put this ahead of applied corporate finance, but actually, Tony Robbins' book should probably end up here. Yeah, see, not a bad book, surprisingly. This is from the guy that has the people walk on the coals, which, by the way, has nothing to do with belief. So, anyways, you might want to know that, but it's just a matter of like the coals not like if you keep moving, the heat transfer is not fast enough to really like burn your feet. Basically, it's kind of the point. So yeah, that was disappointing for me when I found that out, because I was such a big fan of this guy when I was very young. No, I'm not. Okay, cool. So, let's put. Honestly, I think neuroeconomics, judgment and decision making is probably better than this, but these are both actually worse than this financial modeling book. I actually got to put the cookbook at the bottom, because I just don't think there's really. Actually, I'll move the value creation book up. I just don't think that the finance, like the financial cookbook, unfortunately, is going to stick at all. So, yeah. Okay. All right, that's easy. Let's actually move this one to the top, because although it makes some mistakes in some pretty big areas, it does have. It's hard to find materials on crypto valuation models, I would say. So it's still pretty important. Okay, and that's pretty much the ranking for that. So cool. Yeah, so that's all sorted out now. That's the definitive ranking. Obviously, these are a lot of books. I think there's 39 total in here. So maybe like 38, if you count the, if you don't count this one as a book, maybe 37 if you don't count this one, right? But think about 39 in here, counting the CFA books as a single book each. So, yeah. Also, if I had to quickly comment on the CFA books, I'd probably put the level 2 above the level 3 in terms of content. But all these are fantastic. Yeah. Okay, let's leave it at that. All right, cool. So I hope you enjoyed this. If you did, you should like, subscribe, and share it. And I'm not going to try to sell you any of these books. So, if you want to read these, I'd recommend you catch up on the meta instead. I'll leave it to you. Take care.